Well, for more on the strikes, I'm joined on the set by Bruno Palier, a researcher and an author of a book on pension reform. Bruno, thanks so much for coming in to speak to us. What do you think about today being a little bit less of a strike day than we've seen in the past? Is it, as Liza was saying, that people are just preparing for this giant strike day, March 7th, or could the movement be winding down?
No, really, the unions say that today the issue is more to keep the pressure on government to remain on the agenda, but not to increase the number of people mobilized. It's in the middle of holidays, and the big challenge will be on the 7th of March. But still, the unions wanted to be present because, as you know, the law is discussed in the parliament, and there is up to this week for the Assemblée nationale to discuss the articles, and especially the one which is changing, moving the retirement age, at least the minimal one, from 62 to 64. Tomorrow.
How do you see this strike movement evolving? We are talking about this mother of all strikes, perhaps on March 7th. Do you think the strike movement will last much longer than that?
So clearly, this kind of movement is, if not usual, at least has happened in the past. Each time there has been a pension reform. And what we know from the past is that there has been several demonstrations in a row. And there has been strikes. And so far, there hasn't been so many strikes, but big demonstrations, very important one. So this is clearly only the beginning, and the unions had to just bridge over the holiday, and this is what they tried to do. So what has to be seen is what happens in March. In March, there will still be a few weeks of discussion of the legislation, and they want to start very early after the holiday on the 7th and see what happened. But the mobilization is not going down so far as we can see.
Bruno, you've done a lot of work outside of France with Europe. I think it's got to be really extraordinary for people outside of France watching this. I mean, here we have France, one of the lowest retirement ages in Europe. When you look at other countries, we retire at 65, 67, here at 62. Then the strikers saying, oh, no, we're not going to strike during school vacation. We'll get back to it later. I mean, this really plays into this reputation of the French as people who don't like to work. Is that true?
No, if you allow me, 2 points. The first one is that we have to do the right comparison. And as I said, 62 or 64 is the minimal age, the one at which you can decide to go on strike, to go on pension, sorry. As in Sweden, for instance, it's 63. So, but we have a second age, an age that if you didn't contribute to the pension system long enough, 42 years currently, you don't have a sanction, what we call the décote. And this age is 67. And 67 is later than the German age currently. So this should be the age we compare. And as far as the regulation is concerned, we are pretty similar in France as in Europe. What we don't have, what we really miss, is a proper policy to maintain elderly workers at work. And this is really where France is lagging behind. But this is less because people don't want to work than because firms don't want to keep elderly workers. And they didn't do effort as far as training is concerned, as far as working condition is concerned, to keep them. They have the possibilities to get rid of the elder worker, and they do that. So this is really the key issue. The second point I would like to make is that the relationship of French to work is not based on laziness, it's based on the contrary, on intensity. What happens in France is that we have fewer people working because a lot of people have been sacked, as I said, for the elderly. Young people have difficulties to enter the labor market, and the few who remain at work, they are asked to do more and more. There is more unreachable objectives set to teams. There is really a very vertical relationship within firms, and people, many people, not only the basic workers, but also the management, they are fed up with this kind of management based, on verticality and unreachable goals. This is what explains this kind of tiredness with work in France. Just one number. If you consider that the productivity per hour is 100 on average in Europe, in France it is 117. So when we work hard.
It is a good system. We do have to remind people in France don't save for retirement like they might do in other countries because the system is such a good one. But again, you've been studying pension reform closely in France and outside of France. Do you think there's a real possibility there might not be enough money for those retiring if we don't have this pension reform here?
So there is a problem of deficit. This deficit is around 10 to 12 billions per year, starting next year, out of 450 billions, which is not that big deficit. This is really remaining in the Growth and Stability Pact criteria, for instance. So there is an issue. But in order to solve that, there are other solutions than this one. And the other solution is to ask other people to contribute, for instance, the high-skilled workers who are not really touched by this reform because they would have worked beyond 64 anyway, to ask pensioners to make some effort because, as you said, we have a very generous system for the current pensioners, to also think in terms of paying more contribution to finance the system. So there are various solutions. As far as we know in the medium term, the pension level will diminish a little bit in France so that it can afford the demographic transition we are living through. So there were other solutions, and actually the reason for choosing this one is because it's very rapid, makes some saving, and this is what the government felt they needed with regard with their commitment to the European Commission, for instance.
Bruno, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. Bruno Palier, thank you very much.